Good evening, I'm Maciej Mikos and you're watching World News Tonight, live from Warsaw. Until now, Europe has relied largely on the United States for security, but recent changes in Washington mean it will have to take responsibility for its own defense. That was the topic of today's special meeting of European leaders in Brussels. More on that in a moment, but first, the latest headlines. Donald Trump suspends tariffs on Mexico as China and Canada threaten the US with a strong response. Europe's watching this situation closely. Greenland's not for sale, says Denmark, as the US accuses Copenhagen of being a bad ally. And Polish soldiers open a new kindergarten in a town devastated by flooding. European leaders met in Brussels today to discuss a common defense strategy and what money they should allocate for this purpose as the new US administration puts more pressure on its traditional allies to ramp up defense spending. The American bid to acquire Greenland, apart from the current situation in Ukraine, has also dominated today's summit. And our European correspondent, Angela Skujins, has been following the events in Brussels closely. Hello, Angela. How would you sum up today's meeting?
Well, today's meeting technically isn't over. Those 27 EU heads of state met in Brussels this morning and they're still having a working dinner. The aim is to thrash out a common EU defence policy, but this is more or less a brainstorming session. There'll be no formal conclusions from today's meeting, but the aim is to figure out how the EU can strengthen its defence manufacturing sector as well as financing it. Also, all the member states have gathered to figure out their policy for negotiating across the transatlantic with the US President Donald Trump. UK Prime Minister Keir Starmer also made a cameo at today's meeting, as well as NATO Secretary General Mark Rutte. They gave their own press conference at NATO HQ. Here is what those leaders had to say.
2% will not be enough to keep us safe. We need to invest considerably more. We also need to replenish our stocks, and fast. There's no time to waste.
We need to see all allies stepping up, particularly in Europe. President Trump has threatened more sanctions on Russia, and it's clear that that's got Putin rattled. We know that he's worried about the state of the Russian economy. So I'm here to work with our European partners on keeping up the pressure, targeting the energy revenues and the companies supplying his missile factories to crush Putin's war machine.
Yes, so NATO's Secretary-General Mark Rutte was, of course, referencing that 2% funding benchmark as part of NATO, but he told reporters this morning that this target was established in 2014 and, of course, needed to be revised up. But the aim of today's meeting is to give an outlook for the European Commission to publish in their white defence paper. This will be put forth to NATO allies for their summer summit, where a revised NATO funding benchmark will be voted on and established. But those leaders also discussed Trump's overtures towards the Arctic island of Greenland. Of course, we heard the Danish Prime Minister this morning saying that this should not happen or be the case. A press conference is scheduled for later this evening where we'll see some of those ideas put firmly more on paper. That is the latest from Brussels. Back to you in Warsaw.
That was Angela Skujins reporting from Brussels. Thank you very much. Donald Trump stays true to his election promises and is embarking on an international trade war. After slapping 25% tariffs on Canada and Mexico and 10% on China, the US president has backed off a little bit, saying the new duties on Mexican goods will take effect in a month. European leaders are also already reacting to threats of US tariffs on EU exports. Don Arleth reports.
Fears of a major trade war are brewing.
We're thinking in terms of 25% on Mexico and Canada.
But it's not just Canada, Mexico, and China.
Am I going to impose tariffs on the European Union? Do you want the truthful answer, or should I give you a political answer? Absolutely. The word tariff is a very misunderstood word. You've heard me say, I say it kiddingly, but it's one of the most beautiful words in the dictionary. It really is.
But one of the most beautiful words in Trump's dictionary has many concerned about the global economy. On Monday, the Frankfurt Stock Exchange opened 1% in the red, with traders already uneasy about the coming storm. And in the currency market, the euro sank over 2%, achieving parity with the US dollar. In Brussels, at an informal meeting of European leaders, heads of governments are sounding off about President Trump's weekend attack targeting EU economies.
I think that we have to do everything to avoid this totally unnecessary and stupid tariff wars or trade wars.
Both the US and Europe benefit from true exchange, from the exchange of services. With no tariff policy, that makes it difficult. Then that would be bad for the US, bad for Europe. And if we were attacked on commercial issues, Europe, as a power that stands together, will have to be respected and therefore react.
But here's how the US president views the current European-American relationship.
China's an abuser, but the European Union is very, very bad to us. They treat us very, very badly. They don't take our cars. They don't take our cars at all. They don't take our farm products, essentially. They don't take very much. We have a $350 billion deficit with the European Union.
In 2024, U.S. exports to Europe amounted to over $250 million, while EU imports to the United States totaled over $350 billion. So does Donald Trump have a point when it comes to unfair trade practices by the EU concerning autos and agricultural products? The EU levies a 10% import duty on U.S.-produced automobiles, while the United States charges just 2.5% for European cars. When it comes to agricultural products, dairy and certain processed foods encounter much higher EU tariffs compared to similar European imports. So how does Poland fare? According to the Observatory of Economic Complexity, in the first 3 quarters of 2024, Poland had a trade surplus with the United States of just $140 million. But there are voices in Europe who see possibilities to remedy the situation.
Should stay united. No matter are we talking about economic tariffs, we are talking about Greenland or other issues, we have to stay united. And I think this is the necessity of the day.
Another solution was presented last week by the CEO of the German automaker BMW, who told Reuters that the EU should lower its tariffs on American-made autos to 2.5%. While U.S. tariffs have yet to be slapped on the EU, many in Europe are holding their breath. For World News Tonight, Don Arleth, TVP World.
A wave of uncertainty has hit civil society organizations worldwide following the U.S. foreign assistance freeze. The shift in policy, solidified by the U.S. Office of Management and Budget, has left them scrambling to adjust to a new reality. Now, USAID, the world's largest aid provider, might be facing a definitive shutdown, potentially reversing decades of progress on democracy and human rights. Aisha Abachi reports.
Elon Musk, tasked with leading a federal cost-cutting panel, revealed that efforts were underway to dismantle the U.S. foreign aid agency, USAID. The agency's abrupt shutdown is exacerbated by Elon Musk's vocal criticism of the agency on X. Under the America First policy, President Trump has now ordered a global freeze on most U.S. foreign aid, sending shockwaves across the globe. This freeze extends to all foreign assistance programs linked to USAID, including those supporting democracy, human rights, and development.
We have not been able to pay salaries or any expenses since January 24. This means we're not allowed to ask people to come to work.
Civil society organizations around the world are reeling from the freeze, especially in countries like Ukraine, Moldova, and Georgia. Reportedly, in Ukraine, USAID funds efforts ranging from reconstruction to combating Russian disinformation.
Many organizations will not survive this pause.
Workshops, lectures, educational events, informational events, we have to put on hold everything we had been doing in Vinnytsia for 4 years.
In Moldova, the freeze halts critical steps towards energy independence from Russia, such as power line connections with Romania.
There are a lot of organizations in Serbia, in the region of the Western Balkans, also in the Eastern Partnership, in Moldova, in Ukraine, and so on, where actually the fight for democracy, for the rule of law, and for the human rights is still going on. Plan to get some funding for their future projects, for the continuation of their work. So all this is actually now going to end.
Civil society organizations fighting for gender equality or media transparency in Poland will also face repercussions. USAID, which is the world's largest single donor of foreign aid, dispersed $72 billion in 2023, funding a wide range of initiatives. USAID accounted for 42% of all humanitarian aid tracked by the United Nations in 2024. This drastic move is part of a broader shift towards hard power in global geopolitics, as noted by experts reflecting the implications of the US abandoning its soft power.
This is the latest reminder that our world is shifting towards hard power dynamics and a more realist geopolitics, a world where power and security actually prevail over democracy.
However, while the suspension of USAID's funding impacts developments and humanitarian projects, military aid to Ukraine remains unaffected. Secretary of State Marco Rubio has confirmed that aid intended for military operations or life-saving humanitarian assistance is exempt from the freeze. Yet the ambiguity surrounding what qualifies as life-saving assistance has left many organizations in limbo. As civil society organizations across the globe digest the ramifications of the freeze, the situation remains fluid. The next 90 days will be crucial, but many small local organizations may not survive this prolonged disruption.
We will not work together with the party that calls itself the Alternative for Germany, says candidate for Chancellor Friedrich Merz. As Germany's migration policies remain a hot-button issue, the conservative CDU party convenes in Berlin on Monday for its annual congress. The party adopted an immediate action program. Contained within, among other issues, is the conservative frontrunner Friedrich Merz's tougher migration policy. Sascha Farbach reports.
From Hamburg to Berlin. Over the weekend, thousands took to the streets across major German cities. According to some reports, an estimated 170,000 demonstrated in Berlin alone. Their objective? To show their discontent and anger against a harsher pivot on migration in Germany.
I can promise all voters in Germany in no uncertain terms. We will not work together with the party that calls itself the Alternative for Germany. We didn't before, we won't after, and we'll never do that.
Changing the pivot of German migration policy, and since they are controversial, that has caused a reaction in the society.
Friedrich Merz has taken a risky gamble by shifting the CDU's stance on migration, drawing sharp criticism from political opponents. Many accuse him of dismantling the party's long-standing firewall against the far-right AfD. By adopting more populist rhetoric on migration, Merz risks alienating moderate voters and deepening divisions within his own party, all while courting a potentially dangerous alliance with AfD sympathizers.
It has created a sense of fear, and therefore the major parties have decided to respond to that. And the major party, as a matter of fact, leading today's polls, which is CDU, CSU, Social Christian Democrats in Germany, decided to approach the subject of migration policy.
Last week's events had little impact on the CDU and AfD in the polls. The CDU leads with 30%, while the AfD holds around 22%. Furthermore, the AfD received a €2.5 million donation from a former Freedom Party politician in Austria to print over 6,300 posters for the elections. A recent public broadcaster poll in Germany shows most Germans support tougher migration policies.
The majority is not happy about taking so many asylum seekers, 65%. The majority is not happy with how Germany is managing migration. So politics is responding to those moods.
Despite the show of dismay by some Germans over the weekend, Friedrich Merz and his conservatives, as well as his harsher policies, are still finding support. The reaction in the German Bundestag by progressive politicians, as well as citizens in the streets, may have come too late. Experts believe that populists will continue to play a role in German politics.
So the AfD is here to stay, and it will shape the German political spectrum, but the center must hold, otherwise we're in large problems.
As the countdown to election day ticks on, the future of Germany's migration policy and the CDU's political strategy hang in the balance. Will the center hold, or will it fracture under pressure? Only time and the voters will tell. Sascha Farbach, TVP World.
It's not for sale. Danish Prime Minister Mette Frederiksen on Monday reaffirmed Denmark's position in response to US President Donald Trump's proposal to buy Greenland. Her comments come after US Vice President J.D. Vance accused Denmark of failing as an ally. Yamanal Hilo has more in this report.
With its strategic location, vast mineral wealth and growing geopolitical interest, Greenland has become a prize for world powers. But Denmark isn't selling.
Greenland is today a part of the Kingdom of Denmark. It's a part of our territory, and it's not for sale.
On Sunday evening, US Vice President J.D. Vance criticized Denmark's handling of Greenland's sea routes in an interview with Fox News, calling Copenhagen a bad ally.
It's really important to our national security. There are sea lanes there that the Chinese use, that the Russians use, that frankly, Denmark, which controls Greenland, it's not doing its job and it's not being a good ally.
His comments didn't resonate well in Denmark.
What should we say to the families of all the Danish people dead in Afghanistan? And when we have a partner in US, even halfway in the White House, saying things like that, it's so disgusting. And we discuss it here in Denmark.
While the Danes feel insulted by Vance's comments, most of Greenland's 57,000 inhabitants are not ethnically Danish, despite being part of the kingdom for the past 800 years. However, the latest opinion polls suggest that 85% of Greenlanders oppose becoming part of the US. But what drives Trump's interest in the island in the first place?
If we look at the top of the circle of the globe, then we see that the only place between Russia and the United States of America, that is Greenland. That is the place where missiles and everything will pass by.
Beyond security concerns, as a businessman, Trump also sees an opportunity in vast natural resources buried beneath Greenland's surface. But while he and other world powers fight over the island, a new study led by UK scientists confirms that Greenland's ice sheet is cracking faster than ever.
Reconstruction efforts continue in southwestern Poland in the aftermath of the severe flooding that swept through the region last year. Today, a new kindergarten built by the Polish army was opened in one of the hardest hit towns. Our reporter Viduszny Chair was there and has this report.
This is a newly built and newly opened kindergarten in Stronie Śląskie. It was constructed by the Polish army as part of the Operation Phoenix. Today we saw an official opening ceremony of this place. It's opened in Stronie Śląskie, a place which was completely devastated during the flooding which happened here a few months ago, back in September. The original kindergarten in Stronie Śląskie was devastated, damaged inside. On the outside, the building does not look impacted, but inside, everything had to go, and that's why the children needed to be moved to different places. Now they have finally their home. It's a temporary solution. It's a modular kindergarten, but it's well equipped. And the officials who were here during the opening said that they hope that it will serve the community very well. All of the people here have shown big gratitude to all the soldiers who were taking part in Operation Phoenix at its peak. 27 or 26,000 soldiers were involved in Operation Phoenix. It's still continuing, and the Polish government says that it will continue until it's still needed here in the places which were devastated, which were most affected by the flooding that happened here a few months ago.
Donald Trump is convinced that discussions concerning Russia and Ukraine are going pretty well. This comes in a stark contrast to President Zelensky's aide's comments that the American peace plan, consisting of mutual concessions, is a failure. And to talk about peace prospects in Ukraine, we're joined by Ukrainian MP Yevgenia Kravchuk. Good evening.
Good evening.
So, first of all, how do you rate American efforts in negotiating peace in Ukraine so far?
Well, first of all, we are happy that America is involved in this negotiation. We, of course, would like to see more details and to have a meeting with representatives of Trump administration in Kiev, in Ukraine, with our team. Remember, in 2015, when we had a ceasefire, United States were not at the table, just Germany and France, and at the end of the day, it didn't work out. So obviously, we do need United States to be involved. But also, I think that Europe has to take a more active role, because it's still a security on European continent, and European countries should be involved and should know how these negotiations go. So far, we haven't seen any details of the plan, but of course, Ukraine is the country that wants peace most of it.
But don't you think that Ukraine should be involved in the peace talks?
Of course, I mean, without
because
Ukraine...
President Zelensky seemed genuinely surprised by the statement of Donald Trump.
Well, we haven't heard any details from Donald Trump as well, so we do, we're thankful for the efforts, but any peace without Ukrainian interest and Ukraine in it will not be long-lasting, because that's us who will be staying on the territory. That's people of Ukraine who are fighting and people of Ukraine who are suffering. And Russia is not going anywhere from the place where it is.
To what demands can Ukraine... will Ukraine not agree to, and where is there still some space for concessions?
Well, first of all, I think it's not just Ukraine, but the whole global order and the respect for the sovereignty and the borders of sovereign countries should be respected, because, other countries will go in jeopardy, and other empires, especially with nuclear power, will be just, playing cards and games in other places around the world. Of course, Ukraine cannot recognize any of the occupied territories as Russian territory. That's for sure. Obviously, not all of the territories can be, conquered or deoccupied by the military power, at least at this point of the time. We still hold part of Kursk region, which is sovereign territory of Russia. So obviously, we do not need these territories. So that could be one of the arguments during the negotiations. And of course, and it's not just Ukrainian interest; it's interest of Europe and our allies, is the security guarantees and of non-repetition. Because if we're not speaking about just a ceasefire, we had ceasefire in 2015, and 7 years later, it's full-scale invasion. So
let me then interrupt you here and quote NATO Secretary General Mark Rutte. I can't describe to you exactly how these talks will go. I already have ideas about what this composition could look like, but we don't want to make Putin any smarter than he already is. We are making it a little secret. Only the end is certain. Putin will never try again after this. So what do you think Mark Rutte was talking about when he said that he will prevent Russia from attacking Ukraine for good?
Well, obviously, for Russia, it has to be very painful to attack again. And that means right now we have to think about even more sanctions on Russia to make it weaker, rather than thinking about lifting the sanctions. And I'm talking now about the Polish presidency during the 16th package of EU, which will come, I think, in 24th of February to the third, year of the full-scale invasion. Because Russia has to understand that it's going to be painful both economically and militarily if they will attack a sovereign country. And of course, these security guarantees, for us, the best way is to be in NATO, and that's what President Zelensky was speaking, that it's going to be even cheaper for everyone to accept Ukraine in NATO. But we understand that not all countries will say yes, at least at this point. So it has to be, obviously, the security guarantees of the countries that are key players, at least in NATO, to make sure that Russia will not dare to attack a sovereign country.
Yes, but to obtain security guarantees, first you have to reach a ceasefire. But what to make Vladimir Putin enter negotiations?
Well, actually, it's a good question, because right now it doesn't look like that Russia wants these peace negotiations, and probably will try to, to send some signals to Trump. And obviously, Putin doesn't want to look weak and say that, because what he's telling to his people: we are fighting West. We're not fighting Ukraine. Look at the map. How small is Ukraine and how big is Russia? And yet, on the third year of the full-scale invasion, Russia had not been able even to conquer the whole Donetsk region. That was not just the aim of the first 3 days. They wanted to be in Kiev in the first 3 days. So obviously the aim of Putin is to not to have negotiations with Ukraine, but saying that, we're doing the deal with Trump and, we'll be at the table of negotiations again. And I think that it's in our common interest not to let Vladimir Putin look good in this, at the end of the day.
So far it's on freeze, but what would the loss of US aid support mean for Ukraine?
I will tell you this. Since 2022, we increased our own military productions in many times. Right now, 40% of everything we use on the battlefield, and I mean everything, 155 calibers, own production of mines, or even howitzers, we do it by ourselves. Something, of course, we cannot do, such as Patriots. We cannot produce our own Patriots, the air defense. So obviously that would be a huge loss for Ukrainian cities, for civilians, not to have something to be protected from Russian missiles. Other 30% comes from Europe, and other 30% comes from United States. So we really hope that the aid will not be stopped. But of course, our aim is to be more and more efficient in producing the military, to increase the military production, especially drones and artillery.
The US wants Ukraine to hold elections this year, obviously after a ceasefire is reached. Do you think that Washington would like to see someone else at the helm of the country but Volodymyr Zelensky? Since we are a democratic country, it's for Ukrainian people to decide who they elect. And about the elections, the first step is to not to have a war and then have elections. And when we're speaking about Vladimir Putin, they never had normal elections in 20 plus years. He has been a president or prime minister, but still a ruler of United States, of the Russian Federation. And at this time, we had 5 Ukrainian presidents changing. That's democracy, and they do not have democracy. And they had elections, sham election on the occupied territories. So I guess the big question is to what he represents. Does he represent Russian people, or he just reappoints himself every 4 or 5 years, as Lukashenko does? But at the end of the day, of course, Ukraine will have elections, both presidential, parliamentary elections, because we are a democratic country. But when we have missiles crashing to the cities, when we have 1 million, almost 1 million people in the army and cannot participate in elections, well, the first thing is to have the end of this war and to end it with the long-term peace. Because the ceasefire just for ceasefire and to hold elections, that sounds like a, sort of something written in Kremlin. And hundreds of citizens of Ukrainians would not be allowed to take part in the elections, as they would be under Russian domination, still in the east, right?
Of course, in 2015, we had elections and some of the territories were occupied. But first, it wasn't the full-scale invasion. And those people who were on the occupied territories, if they reach the territory of Ukraine, which is under control of Kiev, they can, of course, vote. But we have, 7.5 or 8 million people outside of Ukraine, not in occupied territories. I mean, here, Poland, Germany, Czech Republic, and there should be a way for them to vote. And our consular services, of course, will not be able to accommodate this number of people. That's another question we have to find a solution for.
Therefore, do you think there will be an election in Ukraine this year?
I don't know. Will be a peace in Ukraine this year?
Hopefully.
Hopefully.
Hopefully. Yevgenia Kravchuk, Ukrainian MP, was our guest this evening. Thank you very much. Pleasure, as always. And thank you for watching, and stay with us for much more news and comments here on TVP World.